Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I'll be taking you through the modern max-lang attack, and by the end of this video you'll be able to develop endless attacking sequences, two, to defend complex positions, and the last one, you'll be able to win one positions. So consider subscribing. So I'm urging you to go ahead and subscribe. Here I have the playlist where we have the immortal games, the chess traps, chess masters playing. This includes grandmasters, FIDE masters, international masters, and CMs playing. You can watch them play and learn from them. Also, we have this playlist which has opening analysis of openings like the Caro-Kann, like the D4, the London system. It's also here. We have games which have been fully analyzed against grandmasters. Also, I have the podcasts where I'm showing live play. We are featuring live players when they're playing live. So please consider subscribing and liking the videos, watching the videos. This one will give me more momentum to give you more and more interesting videos so that you can enjoy them, and as you are supporting us to give you more and more content. Thank you so much. Okay, welcome back. Today we shall be looking at the modern max-lang attack, and this arises after e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, knight f6, the two knights defense, short castling, bishop c5, d4, e takes d4, and e5, then d5, the max-lang attack. This is an opening which gives black solidity. This opening, at the same time, it can rise after e4, e5, bishop c4, knight f6, d4, e takes d4, knight f3, knight c6, short castling, bishop c5, e5, and then d5. We arise at the same position of the max-lang attack. Black is counter-attacking the bishop on c4, and white is also attacking the knight on f6, whereby we go for the line which we have prepared for the repertoire. Pawn takes f6, and pawn takes bishop on c4. Now there are a variety of moves to play here. There are two choices. The majority of people are wondering, why don't we go for pawn takes g7? Yes, it looks good, but it's a slow move. Black has had various chances of survival with this line. So here in this position, I would recommend rook e1 check. Now in this position, the move which is always expected from black is bishop e6 to defend against the check. But in one of my games against the FM played king f8, then I played knight bd2, threatening to play knight e4 in the center, attacking the queen after queen taking f6, after the queen taking f6, at the same time attacking the bishop which is on c5. So after seeing that, the FM played bishop b4, just pinning down the knight so that the knight doesn't move forward, because the bishop will take the rook on e1. So I played a3, trying to question the bishop. Bishop takes d2, I played bishop takes d2. The FM played bishop g4, and I still went ahead to question the bishop. I played h3, and the FM played bishop h5, bishop g5, creating a simple threat. In case of pawn takes pawn on g7, the queen will be hanging. So black decided to take the pawn, g times f6, bishop, and bishop h6 check, and the only square black has is king g8, of which the FM played. So if you look at this position, the FM was saying that everything is under control, and now the remaining thing is only developing his queen, and then the game goes on accordingly. Now, in order to mix up things, to make the game more sharp, I decided to play knight d4. So after bishop takes d1, takes c6, attacking the queen, pawn takes c6, and rook a times d1. So the queen has only two squares, c8 and b8. So the FM played queen c8, and I played rook e3. And I went on to win this game comfortably. It is a checkmate in 10, so you can take some time and go through it. So in this position, after d5, we go ahead and take the knight on f6, pawn times f6, pawn times c4, rook e1 check, and bishop e6. Knight g5 attacking the bishop, which is on e6. So the pawn on f6 is untouchable. In case of queen times f6, we play knight takes e6, and after pawn takes e6, we play king h5 check, winning the bishop, which is on c5. So the pawn on f6 is untouchable. In case of queen d6, we begin with knight takes e6. After f times e6, we play pawn takes g7, threatening to take the rook, which is on h8. So after rook g8, we play queen h5 and checking the king. And after king goes to king, maybe king d7 with knight d2. So knight d2 threatens to plank the knight on e4. In one of my online games against a 2-1, my opponent, I was playing against a 2-1, and he began with bishop b4, just pinning down my knight, so that if the knight moves, the rook e1 can be taken. Then I played c3, so he went ahead to play d times c3. Then I played b times c3. After bishop f4, I went ahead to play knight c4, and I went ahead to win the game comfortably. So knight c4 is threatening to take the bishop, which is on f5, and remember also the queen is on the same column, so attacking the bishop. The same knight is also, the knight still is attacking the queen, and also there's a threat of rook d1. So after d5, we said pawn takes f6, d times c4, rook e1 check, bishop e6, knight g5, just attacking the bishop on e6. This pawn f6 is poisonous, as we saw in the previous variation. Queen d7. Now in case of queen d7, we can begin with pawn takes g7, attacking the rook on h8, rook g8, knight takes e6. After pawn takes e6, rook h5, winning the bishop, which is on c5. After the queen check, the bishop on c5 is a hanging piece. So we said we begin with pawn takes f6, d takes c4, rook e1 check, bishop e6. The line continued with knight g5. One of my games, my opponent began with short castling. So after short castling, I played pawn times g7. After king times g7, I played rook takes e6. Now remember, if pawn takes rook, I'll be giving him a royal fork. After knight takes e6, it will be a royal fork. All these pieces will be under attack and also checking. So my opponent, he played pawn h6, of which I went ahead and just took the pawn. Remember, if the king takes, there is a fork, because the bishop will be, there will be a discovered check. The bishop will be attacking the queen. The bishop will be attacking the king. So after pawn take, remember now, after taking that pawn, it has also opened the square for the queen. All these are potential threats. I went on to win the game comfortably. One of my games, my opponent played g6. I proceeded with queen f3, short castling. I took the bishop. Rook takes e6. Now after f times e6, I played f7, check, checking, and I'm trying to create a threat. In case of king coming here to g7, I have a knight check, which is coming on knight takes e6, checking the queen, at the same time the king, which is on g7. So he played wisely. He played king h8, and in this position I played knight times e6. Now knight times e6 is attacking the queen, at the same time forking the bishop, which is on c5. So black has to play energetically. So black had to defend his piece. Black played queen e7, and in this position I played bishop g5 and took the pawn. Queen takes f7, and then I took queen times f7, rook times f7. Then I took the bishop on c5. Then he played rook f he played rook f5, just attacking the two pieces. Then I played knight e4, defending my bishop, which is on g5. Then he played rook. Then I developed my piece, a knight d2. played c3, then I took the pawn, then pawn takes pawn. Then at the end of the day, I checked, king check. Then after king, I checked the king with the bishop, bishop f6 check, king g8, and then I king g8, and then I took the pawn on c3. So I went ahead to win this game comfortably. Pawn takes f6, pawn takes c4, rook e1 check, bishop e6. Then you go ahead and play knight g5. So the best move in this position is queen d5. Then we go ahead and develop another piece, knight c3. The knight is untouchable because the bishop on e6 is pinned down by the rook on e1. Queen d7. Then we go ahead and play knight c e4, just trying to attack the bishop on c5. So in one of my games, my opponent played a bishop b6. I went ahead to play. Then I played f times g7. Now this one opens a square where I can fork his king and the queen. And in this position, at the same time, I'm attacking the rook, which is on h8. Queen d5, knight c3, queen f5, then knight c e4. Played is short castling in this position. We begin with pawn takes g7, king takes g7, knight times c5, and after queen takes c5, we play rook times e6, and this pawn is untouchable. As we saw it in the previous chapter, it will just be a free piece. If you play pawn f6, we can just drop back our knight comfortably, and we can go on to win the game very easily. Remember, this knight rook can't be taken because of knight check, blocking the queen and the king. Knight g5. So queen d5, knight c3, which is we said is untouchable. Queen f5, knight c e4. So in one of my games, my opponent played bishop f8. I went ahead to play knight times f7. So in this position, there are two choices to take on. Let's begin with bishop takes f7. Here there is a tactic which begins with knight d6 check, forking the king at the same time the queen. Let's go back. Played king takes f7, and after king takes f7, I played knight g5 check. Now there are two choices. In the case of king takes f6, there is rook takes e6. With my opponent played king g8, and then I played knight takes e6. Then he continued with rook e8. Then I played knight takes f8, rook times f8. Then I played queen e2. Queen e2, only to putting an attack on the pawn which is on c4. So he played d3, pawn takes d3, c takes d3, then queen d1. Still emphasizing the check of the king from this diagonal and also attacking the pawn which is on b6. So after queen d5, knight c3, queen f5, knight c e4. So in one of my other games, my opponent still went with bishop b6. I played knight g3. After knight g3, there are two choices. In case of queen takes f6, then we begin with knight h5. So in case of queen g6, we take the bishop on e6. So after pawn takes e6, rook check, the attack, checking the king at the same time attacking the queen. In case of queen takes e6, then knight times g7 check, blocking the king and the queen. Let's go back. Knight g3, he played queen g6. So after queen g6, pawn takes g7, rook g8, queen h5, just asking for exchange. Remember, when you take this queen, the knight comes defending the pawn which is on g8, at the same time threatening to play knight f6 in the future. He played short castling, queen takes g6, h times g6, knight times e3, f times e6. Then I went ahead to play bishop h6. whereby I fought on this pawn and I went ahead to convert this game very easily. Knight g5, queen d5. In case of queen d5, knight c3, queen f5. Then white can play knight c, e4. So after even the recommended move, which is long castling, g4. He played queen d5. Then I played pawn takes g7, attacking the rook. So in this position, he played rook g8, and I played knight f6. So the line still continue with d times f6, pawn times c4, rook e1 check, bishop e6, knight g5, queen d5, knight c3, queen f5. Then the move which is recommended is knight c, a4. In case of long castling, we said we begin with g4. Queen has to remain on this rank to protect the bishop, which is on c5. g4, but this pawn is untouchable. For instance, if the queen takes pawn on g4, check, queen takes, bishop takes, knight takes f7. Knight takes f7, forking the rook and this rook. Let's go back. So that's why my opponent played queen g6. I went on to play knight takes e6, f takes e6, g7, and in this position black has nothing to do because the pawn is attacking the rook. At the same time, the knight is also attacking the bishop on c5, and also at the same time threatening to take the pawn on e6. So we then begin with pawn takes f6, pawn takes e4, rook e1, bishop e6, knight g5, queen d5, knight c3. Remember, it's untouchable. Queen f5, it still has to put an eye on c5, knight c, e4. In case of long castling, begin with g4. In case of queen e5, we begin with knight takes e6. Remember, the queen can't take this knight because the bishop on c5 will be hung piece. It can be taken by the knight, which is on e4. So my opponent played f times e6. After f times e6, I played f times g7. And after rook h g8, I played bishop h6.